Hello, my name is Nick Wigda, and today I'm going to talk to you about Huntington's disease. First of all, it is important to understand what Huntington's disease is. So, it is an inherited brain disease that causes neurons in the brain, specifically the basal ganglia region, which controls voluntary movement, but also other cerebral cortex areas, to lose their function and die. Now, this is a slow deterioration process in the brain, but it happens progressively worse and worse. And it is all due to the mutation of the HTT gene, which is known as the Huntington gene. The two types of Huntington's disease are the adult onset form and juvenile Huntington's disease. The adult onset form is the most common form, and symptoms will show up within adults around 30 years old and older. However, juvenile Huntington's disease affects younger children and teenagers, but it is also more rare. So the main cause of Huntington's disease comes from the mutation of the HTT gene. Now, this gene is in every single person. Everyone has it. However, when it's mutated, that's what leads to someone developing Huntington's disease. And overall, this is passed on through an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern, which I'll explain a little bit later. But if one parent has it, there's a 50% chance that the child will develop it. So when looking at the actual HTT gene, it is made up of CAG nucleotide sequences. In people without the disease, the CAG sequences usually repeat for about 20 times. However, when someone has the mutated gene, the CAG sequences are usually around 40 or more repeats, in which this image shows how the mutated protein looks and how it can lead to neuron degeneration and atrophying of basal ganglia and enlargement of lateral ventricles. Again, this gene mutation must be inherited from a parent that has the disease. So here's an example of an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern. So the capital H represents the HTT mutation here. So the parent on top has capital H, lowercase h, and the parent on the side has just lowercase h's. So whenever they have children, and represented by the four squares, 50% of them, so two of them, will get Huntington's disease. However, the other two will not get Huntington's disease because it is a dominant pattern. So you need that capital H in order to have that mutation passed on to you. If the children do not have a capital H within them, then they will not develop the disease and they cannot pass it on to further children in the future. Here is a rough depiction of what a normal brain looks like in comparison to a brain with Huntington's disease. As you see, the normal brain, the lateral ventricles in the center are normal sized, as well as the basal ganglia, which are represented by the gray triangle-like figures. But in the Huntington's disease, those basal ganglia are atrophied. They're a lot smaller, while the ventricles are enlarged. Now, let's review the motor and physical signs and symptoms of the disease. One of the most notable signs is referred to as chorea, which is involuntary quick movements that are unpredictable. The person can also display tremors, twitching, and unusual tongue movements. Muscle rigidity is very common, as the muscles will become stiff and hard to move over time. People with this disease have trouble walking, staying balanced, and maintaining normal coordination skills due to the breakdown of the motor functions in their brain. On top of everything, they can lose speech capabilities as well as having trouble with eating and swallowing, which can lead to rapid weight loss. Overall, their motor skills become very limited and reduced from what they used to be. Now, let's review the cognitive and mental signs and symptoms of this disease. One of the biggest mental health issues people with Huntington's disease face is depression. Now, depression is not only formed from being sad about their condition. When the brain matter atrophies and brain cells are dying off, the structure of the brain will dramatically change. People that lose gray matter volume are more likely to develop depression as their brain structure and function are literally different to what they were once before. Besides depression, people with Huntington's disease can develop dementia. Since their brain is atrophying and neurons are dying off, they will have trouble with their memory and learning processes. Along with these factors, they will experience major personality changes. In my little drawings to the right, you can see how a once happy person can become very melancholy or very irritated all of the time. Again, they will act differently because their brain is different. Lastly, a person can experience anxiety and fatigue as well as hallucinations and massive paranoia. In order to get an official diagnosis for the disease, a person must be examined by a neurologist. The neurologist must conduct both a neurological and physical examination on the person. They will look for involuntary movements, such as jerking movements, twitching, and tremors, as well as running blood tests, doing genetic testing, and using medical imaging to look at the structure of the brain. As you see on the image on the right, there's a comparison between two brains, one normal, one with Huntington's disease, and the one with the disease, the ventricles in the center are enlarged, or much larger than the ventricles on the normal brain. So that's a key factor they're going to look at. Well, the biggest factor here is the genetic testing, because that will determine if the person really has the HTT mutation within them. Currently, there is no cure for Huntington's disease, and treatments really can't slow or reverse the worsening of the disease. However, treatment options can improve quality of life and give them more strength both physically and mentally for a longer period of time. Unfortunately, people with the disease will most likely die within 15 to 20 years after first presenting their initial symptoms. So medications for physical involuntary movement are haloperidol and tetrabenazine. These help to control unusual movements and can even eliminate hallucinations within the person. There's also medications for their mental health issues. So the biggest ones are SSRI medications and anti-anxiety medications. These help regulate the person's depression, anxiety, and personality changes. There's also quetiapine and olanzapine, which reduce agitation and violent outbursts from the person. First, let's look at the benefits of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy can be used to help the person develop coping strategies as well as managing their expectations for the future. Also, this is a great way for the person to build up their mental health and stay strong during this time. If they want to express their feelings and concerns, or just get general support from an outside source, then these psychotherapy sessions can show them that they are not alone. Lastly, psychotherapy can open up communication amongst family members, as these loved ones will also be faced with many challenges during this time. It is important for them to be able to express their feelings too, as well as to learn more about how they can help their loved one through this disease. On the other hand, speech therapy is beneficial since it allows the person to strengthen their muscles used for verbal communication and improve their overall communication skills. Unfortunately, as the person's condition gets worse and worse, they will lose speech capabilities. However, doing these speech exercises will allow for them to be able to verbally communicate for a lot longer with less difficulty. Besides verbal communication, speech therapy sessions can also be used to teach the person about how to communicate in different ways using different mediums. For example, the person can learn how to use a visual aid board to communicate their thoughts. The benefits of physical therapy include building the person's strength and flexibility, as well as reducing their chance for falling. Considering that falling can become dangerous when having limited motor skills, it is important for them to keep doing their exercises and to stay strong. On the other hand, the benefits of occupational therapy include allowing for the person to maneuver more easily within their living space, as well as learning how to properly use assistive devices. One of the biggest things in this occupational therapy is adding handrails within their living space, as well as learning those different how to use those different assistive devices so they can help themselves without relying on someone else. The only real way to prevent the mutation of the HTT gene from being passed on to their children is through in vitro fertilization. When the embryos are formed, genetic testing can be done to see if any of them have the HTT mutation. After seeing which embryos have it and which ones do not, the parents can choose to implant the mutation-free embryos back into the mother's uterus. This concludes my presentation. Here are my references. Thank you so much for watching.